Okay, let's get into it. We're talking about Queen Victoria today, who was on the throne for an incredible 63 years. And her reign wasn't just a long time. It completely changed the world. We're talking global power, industry, the whole thing. It defined an era.
It really did. And that's what we want to dig into, not just the timeline, but what it all meant. We'll look at how she got to the throne, her relationship with Prince Albert, and then the huge, just massive changes that happened during her reign. And we have to start with her childhood, which was, well, it was really isolated.
Right. She was born on May 24th, 1819, at Kensington Palace. Her father died when she was just a baby, only 8 months old. So she was raised by her mother and this very controlling advisor.
And that control is key. It led to something called the Kensington System. Think of it as this super strict set of rules designed by her mother and the advisor to basically control every aspect of her life.
How strict are we talking?
I mean, she was never, ever allowed to be alone. Not for a second. She couldn't even walk downstairs without someone holding her hand. She had to sleep in her mother's bedroom every single night.
Wow. So this was less about protection and more about, what, power?
It was absolutely about power. The advisor's whole plan was to make her so dependent that when she became queen, he would be the one really in charge. But it backfired. It just made her tougher and more independent. In fact, the very first thing she did as queen was ask for an hour by herself, something she never had in her life.
That's a powerful statement. And despite all that, she had a pretty serious education, right? Languages, history.
Oh, absolutely. She was fluent in German, learned French, history, music. And then, when she was just 12, she found out she was next in line for the throne. She actually saw it on a family tree diagram. And just a few years later, at 18, she became queen.
How did that happen? Was it sudden?
Very. They woke her up in the middle of the night. Her uncle, the king, had died. Just like that, she was the monarch. Her coronation at Westminster Abbey was this huge public event. She moved right into Buckingham Palace and started to rule.
And she was so young. Did she have help?
She leaned very heavily on her prime minister at first, Lord Melbourne. He really guided her through the politics of it all. And, people were a little wary of that. A young queen relying on one politician.
It could look like he was pulling the string.
Exactly. But she was a quick study. She figured out pretty fast how the system worked, that she reigned, but the government ruled. She got her footing, and that set her up for the most important relationship of her life.
Which brings us to Prince Albert, her first cousin.
Yes, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. They married in 1840, and it was a genuinely happy, loving marriage. But it was so much more than that. Politically, it was a game changer.
Why was that?
Because he wasn't just a husband, he was her closest advisor. He was incredibly smart, disciplined, and he really understood science, technology, administration. Victoria was the queen. She even proposed to him, but she trusted him completely.
And they had a huge family, right? 9 children.
9 children, and they all married into other royal families across Europe. That's why she ended up being called the grandmother of Europe. It created this vast web of connections.
Albert also seemed to be her link to the future, to everything that was happening outside the palace, the Industrial Revolution.
He was a true visionary. He saw that Britain's power was in its industry, its technology, and his biggest project was the Great Exhibition of 1851.
The one in the Crystal Palace.
That's the one. And it wasn't just a fair, it was a statement. It was designed to show the world that Britain was the workshop of the world, to show off all the inventions, all the resources from the empire.
And the building itself was part of that message.
Absolutely. The Crystal Palace was an engineering marvel, all glass and iron. It was a symbol of what was possible. 6 million people came to see it. So their partnership wasn't just personal. It completely rebranded the monarchy. They presented this image of a strong, stable, moral family. And that was so important because the country itself was going through, well, chaos.
Okay, so let's shift to that, the Industrial Revolution. It's hard to even imagine the scale of change.
It's almost impossible. Britain went from being a farming country to an industrial superpower. You had new machines, factories making goods faster and cheaper than ever before.
And you needed a way to move all those goods.
Which is where the railways came in. Steam engines changed everything. Suddenly you could move raw materials, finished products, and people across the country in a fraction of the time. And that's what caused so many people to leave the countryside and move to the cities for factory jobs.
Creating huge new problems, overcrowding, pollution.
Massive problems. London, Manchester. These cities exploded in size, but they didn't have the infrastructure to handle it. You had slums, terrible pollution, and diseases like cholera were rampant. On the one hand, you have incredible inventions like the telegraph connecting the world. On the other, you have this immense social cost.
So all this new industry and wealth, that's what fueled the British Empire's growth.
100%. The money paid for the Royal Navy, which you needed to protect all the global trade routes. And during her reign, the empire got to its largest size ever. It covered almost a quarter of the world's land.
The famous saying, the sun never set on the British Empire.
It became literally true, and the system was designed to feed itself. You'd get cheap raw materials like cotton from India or wool from Australia.
Ship them back to factories in England.
Exactly. Process them, and then sell the finished goods back to the colonies and the rest of the world. It made Britain incredibly wealthy, but it obviously created enormous challenges and conflicts in those territories.
And the symbol of all that was her title, Empress of India, which she got in 1876.
Yes, and that was a very strategic move. After the Indian Rebellion in 1857, the British government took direct control of India from the East India Company. Making Victoria the Empress cemented that authority. It put her on the same level as, say, the Tsar of Russia.
But she had a personal interest in India too, didn't she?
She did. She never actually went there, but she was fascinated by the culture. She had Indian servants. She learned some Hindi and Urdu. It was more than just a political title for her.
Okay, so with this global empire and these crowded cities, there must have been huge pressure for scientific progress, especially in medicine.
Oh, the breakthroughs were incredible. The discovery that germs cause disease changed everything. Before that, doctors didn't even wash their hands between surgeries.
Hard to imagine.
Joseph Lister pioneered antiseptic surgery, and it saved countless lives. And in the cities, you had major public health projects. London's great sewer system was built during this time to provide clean water and stop diseases from spreading.
And Victoria supported this.
She did. In fact, she was one of the first monarchs to use anesthesia during childbirth. That royal stamp of approval made it much more acceptable for everyone else.
At the same time, you're starting to see major social reforms. Laws to protect workers.
Yes, things like the Factory Acts. They put limits on how many hours women and children could work. It was a slow process, but it was the start of the government taking responsibility for people's welfare. And you also had more government funding for schools, so literacy rates went way up.
So all of this creates a new kind of person, the middle class.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Managers, clerks, shop owners, people who suddenly had a bit of extra money and, just as important, free time. And that created a whole new culture. Organized sports like football became huge. People started taking holidays to the seaside. It's also when the movement for women's right to vote really started to get organized.
But for Victoria personally, this period of incredible progress was hit by a huge tragedy.
A devastating one. Prince Albert died in 1861. He was only 42. She was completely heartbroken. He had been everything to her husband, her advisor, her best friend. She went into this deep, deep mourning and wore black for the rest of her life. 40 years.
And she basically disappeared from public life for a while, didn't she? They called her the Widow of Windsor.
She did. For more than 10 years, she hardly ever came to London. She stayed at her private homes, Balmoral in Scotland or Osborne House, and that started to cause a problem. People began to wonder why they were paying for a monarch they never saw.
So how does she come back from that?
Her advisors had to kind of gently push her back into the public eye. A big part of it was channeling her grief into public memorials for Albert, like the Royal Albert Hall. It was a way to honor him while also reconnecting with the nation.
And then came the Jubilees. That must have been a huge boost.
The Jubilees were a masterstroke of public relations. You had the Golden Jubilee for 50 years on the throne, and then the Diamond Jubilee for 60 years. And these weren't just parties. They were massive imperial celebrations.
Right, with leaders from all over the empire coming to London.
Exactly. It was a huge display of power and unity, and it worked. It completely restored her popularity and made her this beloved figure, the mother of the empire. By then, she was the longest-reigning monarch in British history.
And her life finally came to an end in 1901.
Yes, she died on January 22nd, 1901, at Osborne House. She was 81. And her death wasn't just the end of a life, it was truly the end of an era.
The Victorian era.
She left behind a world that was just transformed, an industrialized nation, a global empire. Her long, long reign gave an entire age of incredible change its name.
Good luck with your studies.